Hey everyone, welcome back to a new video. My name's Jason. Thanks for watching. Today we're checking out a huge power station. This is the Energizer PPS2000W. Now, I did review the Energizer 320 earlier on the channel. I was very happy with this, so I'm pretty excited to show you guys this larger model. Now, this power station has a launch MSRP of $21.99, but for the entire month of May, you can purchase it for $17.99 using a special discount code in the video description. And it is packed with a bunch of features, including 2,150 watt hours of capacity using lithium iron phosphate batteries. You can get 2,000 life cycles. It means taking it from 100% down to 0% and then charging it back up. That's one life cycle. You can get 2,000 life cycles out of this power station and still have 80% of the original capacity. So very good there. Now this does have a 2,100 watt pure sine wave inverter, a dedicated 30 amp DC output, USB ports here, wireless charging on the top, and it does support 900 watts of solar input. Now I did have this for 2 months, so I've been testing it extensively and I've done a couple real world tests. Now outside I have 2 larger solar panel arrays that I like to power these power stations with. So one example that I did first was to try to power a full-size refrigerator for over a week, just using solar input. So I plugged this into my large refrigerator downstairs. I did not have it plugged into the wall at all. I only had 725 watts of solar plugged in. And I actually ran this power station for 2.5 weeks without any issues. And at that point, I just stopped the test. So as long as you get decent solar, you can run a large refrigerator off this in a power outage, no problems whatsoever. Now, the next test that I did that I thought would be really useful for you guys is I actually ran my whole home studio off this. So my expensive desktop editing PC, yes, I trusted the inverter here, ran it just fine. My studio lights, charged a few other power stations, my 3 monitors, router, everything like that was all plugged into this with the 925 watt array, and everything worked just fine. Now, of course, I did all my other testing, and that's what the video is going to be about, testing the AC inverter, the DC output, the capacity, make sure it doesn't shut off, things like that. And we'll be doing that here in the next minute. Now at the end of the video, we will be putting this through my new power station grading system, giving it a score of 1 to 10 to see how it stacks up against the competition. So hopefully you guys are excited. At the bottom, you'll see a bunch of chapters you can skip through to what you want to see. Let's go ahead and start with the DC output. Now the first testing that we'll be doing on the power station has to deal with the USB ports, the 5521 connectors, and the 12 volt socket. Now all the DC output on this power station is regulated at 13.5 volts. So let's go ahead and start our testing with the 12 volt socket first and the 5521 barrel connections. Let's plug in some battery load testers and see how much we can pull. Okay, so I have my battery load tester hooked up to the 12 volt socket. We're pulling 141 watts, 13 volts, and 10.2 amps. Let's go ahead and turn it up to see how much power we can pull before it shuts off. Okay, so keep track of this number on the screen here. We're gonna go ahead and turn it up and see when it actually shuts off from being overloaded. So we're sitting at 10.2 amps, 10.7, okay, so it shut off at 10.7 amps. Okay, so now let's go ahead and test the 5521 connection. We're currently pulling 140 watts, 13.1 volts at 10.1 amps. So keep an eye on the screen. We're gonna go ahead and turn it up to see when it shuts off. 10.5 amps, 10.6, 10.7, and it shut off. Okay, so now I have both battery load testers plugged into the 12 volt socket and the 5521 connection. Now it's rated for a maximum of 10 amps at the same time, so I have each one loaded to 5 amps. Let's take a closer look at the screen to see if the voltage is kind of going up and down or if it's staying constant. Okay, so you can see we're still sitting at 13.5 volts, even under a 140 watt load, and that output is not changing at all. So really good regulation on the output. Let's go ahead and turn it up to see if we still get the same amount of power as before. Okay, so we got to around 150 watts and it shut off. Now, after you cause an alarm, you'll see that the DC output is enabled, but it's not putting out any power. So you have to go into the alarm by pushing the alarm button, and you can see the error, and we need to clear this error for it to be able to turn back on. And then you can see we have power again. Now, what's really cool is this power station actually supports 100 watt USB-C output, so you can charge laptops, cell phones, or even other power stations. So I have the included USB-C cable plugged into this power station over here, and we're charging it up at 100 watts. And that's at the same time as pulling 140 watts through both of these battery load testers. Now just to break that down a little bit, you can see we're getting 13.5 volts output still. Total power is 246 watts. So that's 140 watts through the 12 volt socket in 5521 and 106 watts out through the USB Type-C. Okay, so now I'm testing everything on the USB and DC output. So I have a USB fan running here, a USB light, both battery load testers, and I'm charging the power station at 100 watts with the USB-C output. I have a cell phone plugged in, charging through a USB port, and then I have another cell phone on top, charging with wireless charging. Let's see what power is coming out of this power station. Okay, so a quick tip here. If you want to click on the output, you can actually see what's happening. So if you click on the DC output, it'll break it all down. So 13.5 volts going out, and we have 272 watts total. So 140 watts through the DC output, and then 133 watts through all the USB ports. Now what's really cool, even after you have all this stuff connected up, you can still charge it up via solar panels. So I just connected up my solar panel array. Let's see how much power we're getting in. Okay, so I apologize for the background noise of these fans running, but basically you see we're getting 273 watts out through the DC load, but we're getting 730 watts input on the solar panels. You can click here, we get 94 volts at 730 watts. So that is a ton of power through the solar charging. Okay, so now that we've finished testing out this side here, we're actually not done. This power station also offers a 30 amp DC output over here. Let me show you how that works. Now what's really cool is this power station actually comes with all the cables you need. So this is a 30 amp cable that comes out to an XT60, and then it has an XT60 cable that connects to Anderson power pole. Okay, so unfortunately I went to hook up my Anderson power pole connection and you can see that they are reversed. So I think you can actually peel this back here, this cover here, and we're gonna pop these off and reverse them because there is a standard and this is backwards. So let's pop these off and get them hooked back up properly. Okay, so usually these slide together, so let's see if we can peel this off. Okay, so see they're apart. Now you usually want the red up and to the right. So like that. So then we slide these back together. A little tricky, but we'll get it. Okay. So now, see, they hook up. So throw this back on top, this rubber grommet thing. There we go. And we can hook it up. Boom. Okay, so now I have both my battery load testers pulling max power out of this 30 amp output. Let's see what power we're getting. Okay, so we're sitting at 13.5 volts, pulling 375 watts. Okay, so I'm only gonna run this load for a little bit of time because I'm really pushing these two battery load testers. You can see we're getting 12 volts at 13.1 amps and 11.9 volts at 15.1 amps. So the reason we're getting low voltage numbers here is because the amount of amperage we're pulling through this 12 gauge wire. So we're gonna get some voltage drops. So we are pulling almost 30 amps, which is pretty awesome. I'll go ahead and turn off the test. Okay, so the next test that I want to run on the power station is to see if the DC output has any eco mode settings or if it will actually stay enabled for 24 hours. So I have my IceCo VL45 12 volt compressor fridge plugged into the power station. Now we just started the test, so the power station is at 100% and the compressor is pulling 32 watts out of the DC output. Now the reason I like to use a 12 volt compressor fridge for this test is because the compressor actually cycles on and off. So there's times where it doesn't pull any wattage and then there's times where it's pulling around 32 watts. So I'm gonna go ahead and let this run for about 24 hours. We're gonna come back and check on the battery percentage and see if the fridge is still running.
Many hours later.
Okay guys, complete change of plans. I actually got sick for a couple days and I really just didn't worry about this. And it's actually been about 70 hours. You can see the fridge is still running, still set at 32 degrees. Let's go check the power station. Okay, surprisingly, it still has 34% remaining. You can see the DC output is still on and the compressor is not running, so it's pulling 0 watts. So it looks like we pulled around 1% per hour, and that's actually including the parasitic drain on the DC output. So what do the test results tell us here? Well, this power station definitely doesn't shut off the DC output, especially if you leave it for 70 hours. And it should run a 12 volt compressor fridge without any issues. Now you'd get even a longer runtime, possibly an unlimited runtime if you plugged a couple solar panels into this power station. You could run one of these fridges basically forever as long as you had the sun shining. Okay guys, now that we've tested the DC output, I want to do a DC capacity test using both of these load testers in a parallel configuration to bring the battery from 100% down to 0% to see the total watt hours you'd expect to get while using this power station. Okay, you should be able to hear the fans on the power station in the background. We're pulling quite the large load. It's right around 265 watts. Now I dialed these back from 150 each just so that they wouldn't fry over this long test. So I have each one set to about 10 amps, pulling a little bit over 130 watts. Now the test has been going for about 25 minutes so far, pulling 265 watts, and you see we're at 95%. So let's go ahead and let this run all the way down to 0%. Okay guys, it's been 6.5 hours. The battery finally hit 0% and shut off the DC output. Let's go ahead and check to see what we got. Okay, so on the first one we pulled 820.92 watt hours, or about 65.57 amp hours. On the second one, we pulled 826.33 watt hours, or about 65.35 amp hours, and the test ran for 6 hours and 33 minutes. Now, totaling that up, we got 1647.25 watt hours. So let's go ahead and see how that compares to the advertised capacity. Now remember, this has 2150 watt hours advertised. So if we take that 1647 divided by 2150, that gives us 76.6% of the advertised capacity. Now I usually like to see around 85% or better, and you can see that we definitely fell short of that number here, so that's pretty disappointing on our DC output results. Okay guys, in the next portion of the video, I want to do some testing on the AC inverter. Now the AC inverter on this is rated at 2100 watts output continuous, and there are 6 different outlets that you can plug appliances into. Now plugging in my voltmeter here to the AC inverter, you can see we're getting 120 to 121 volts output. Now when I swap this over to my oscilloscope mode, you can see we're getting a pure sine wave output sitting right at 60 Hertz with a voltage of 112 volts RMS. Now putting aside all that complicated jargon, what does that really mean? Well, basically the power that you get from this power station is very similar to the power that you pay for from your power company. So you should be able to plug in sensitive electronics, appliances, or even power tools as long as they don't go over 2100 watts. But let's go ahead and start testing the power station inverter. So the first test that I like to run is a max load test for 15 minutes. So we're going to be pulling 2100 watts through this extension cable here. We're going to have a timer going for 15 minutes, and we're going to be tracking both the voltage and the sine wave output to make sure everything works. So let's go ahead and start the test. Okay, so we started the test about 1 minute ago. You can see we're getting 119 volts output from the inverter at max load. Let's take a closer look at the screen. Now you can see we're pulling 2080 watts or so. Now this is as close as I can get without going over the 2100 mark. Now you can hear in the background on the power station that the fans are running. They're not extremely loud, but they do move a lot of air, which is good to keep everything cool inside. See, we hit the 3-minute mark here. I'm gonna let this run until 5 minutes and we'll do a check-in at 5 minutes. Okay guys, it's been 5 minutes. I just wanted to show you guys the wavelength here. Now we're getting a really good sine wave output. We're not getting any deformities. We're not getting any voltage drop, which is a really good sign that this inverter can handle a large load. Okay guys, we just hit the 10-minute mark. Everything's running just fine. Still getting a good sine wave output. The voltage is sitting right around 119 to 120 volts. We did drop quite a bit on the power station percentage, but that's to be expected. Let's let it run for the final 5 minutes and then we'll do a final check. Okay guys, we hit the 15-minute mark. The inverter ran just fine the entire load. Now I did feel the air coming out of the side. It's just slightly warm, which is a good sign. Definitely gets enough airflow to keep everything cool inside. Never saw any voltage drop issues. Always saw pure sine wave output during max load, so no issues on this inverter. Okay, so before jumping into the next inverter test, I just want to explain a little bit about the battery capacity. So we ended this 15-minute max load test at 63%, and that means the inverter used 37% of the capacity during a 15-minute load test. So if this test was to continue, I'm guessing we'd pull around 74% of the battery capacity at 30 minutes, meaning we could run a load like this for about 40 to 45 minutes max. And this is the case on any power station, especially when you have a large load going out of the AC inverter. So just understand, if you're going to be maxing one of these out, you probably won't get quite as much efficiency as you would using a medium or small load. Now, another test that I like to run on these larger power stations is to see how the inverter handles a full-size refrigerator. So let's go ahead and charge this back up, and then we'll test running my full-size fridge. So this is the fridge in my basement. It's a 20 cubic foot full-size refrigerator. It's a little bit old, so it's not very efficient. And I have it plugged into the Energizer. Now I actually started this test yesterday at 6:18 p.m. and it's been going for a little over 24 hours. It's 6:37 p.m. today. So let's go see how much power is left in the power station. Okay, so taking a closer look at the screen, you see there's 17% capacity remaining on the power station. So I'd expect maybe 4 to 6 more hours of runtime with this remaining power. Now throughout this test, my basement averages around 65 degrees. So if you were in a warmer climate, remember that the compressor on your fridge would probably have to run more often, leading to a little bit less runtime on the power station. Now the last test I'll be running on the AC inverter is a complete discharge test. I have it charged up to 100%. This battery is rated at 2150 watt hours. So as we take it all the way down to 0%, we'll be tracking the amount of watt hours through this watt meter. Then we can compare it to the advertised amount. Now taking a closer look at the screen, you see we're pulling around 520 watts. The battery's at 98% and we've already pulled 20 watt hours. Let's go ahead and let this test run and see what we get. Okay guys, the time lapse just ended and the power station hit 0%. The AC inverter shut off. Now we're gonna have to go ahead and put a little bit of charge back into it so we can turn it back on and then read the results of the watt meter. Now with the power station charged up, we're able to see that we pulled 1780 watt hours. So if we divide that by the advertised capacity of 2150, that gives us 82.7% of the advertised capacity. Now I was definitely hoping for more capacity and we fell short of our 85% goal. So it looks like if you take the battery from 100% down to 0%, you should expect somewhere around 1780 watt hours. Okay, let's go ahead and take a second to talk about the parasitic drain on this power station. Well, what is parasitic drain? That means if you don't have any load on the power station, also nothing plugged into any of the outputs, but you leave on the DC output or the AC inverter, how much power is lost over time? So I do 4 different tests. Let's go ahead and fly through these results. So the first one is just by leaving the screen on. Now the screen does have a timeout feature, but I wanted to see if you left the screen on, how much power it would lose. So after about 4 hours, it only lost 2%. So around 0.5% per hour by leaving the screen on. Now the next one was the DC output. Basically over a 4-hour period, it only lost 3%. That was around 0.75% per hour, which is pretty efficient. I've seen power stations use more with the DC output enabled, so this one doesn't use that much power. Now, the AC inverter is a different story. By leaving the AC inverter on, I lost 2% per hour. So if you left it for 4 hours with the AC output enabled, you'd lose 8% on the power station. And now with leaving everything on, so the AC inverter, DC output, and the screen, I also saw 2% per hour, so it didn't seem to add that much on the top. So overall, if you're gonna be using this power station, make sure that you have solar panels plugged in, because as I was charging up through the day with solar panels, I was able to keep it at 100%, no issues whatsoever. Or if you're gonna be leaving it for a while, turn off the power station or at least turn off the outputs you aren't gonna be using. Now this power station comes with 3 main ways to charge it up. You have your AC adapter, you have a solar panel cable, and you have DC to DC charging. So I want to show you guys how you can charge this up using each one of those ways and how many watts you'd expect to get. Let's go ahead and start with the AC wall charger first. So there's 2 charging inputs. This one goes in the side on the right. So let's go ahead and plug that in. And that's all you have to do. Make sure this is plugged into an AC power source, and then it will start charging the power station. Now when you're using the AC charger, you should expect somewhere around 470 watts. Now this will charge up the power station in about 5 hours. Now what's really cool is if you happen to have 2 of these AC wall chargers, this one's from my Blue Yeti AC200P, it's the same spec as this one. You can take it and plug it into the secondary charging input. So you take the stock cable, set that to PV input, and then you take this adapter that's an XT90 to 8mm and you plug it in. And then you can plug in this charger, and now you can charge at double the charging rate. So now you can see instead of just getting 470 watts input, we're getting an additional 450 watts. So now we would charge in maybe 2.5 hours. Now these wall chargers do put out a ton of power, and that's why you have a fan that's running all the time whenever they're plugged in. Now I always prefer to charge up my power station using solar panels, so let's go ahead and jump into a solar charging demo. Now using solar panels on this power station is really easy. You take the stock charging cable that comes out of that port, and you take your solar panel cable and you plug it in. Now this port says it supports 10 volts all the way up to 145 volts DC and 15 amps. Okay, so I'm excited to do two different tests today with solar. The first test is going to be using two of these 180 watt Bouge RV solar panels connected together in parallel. These are 12 volt panels, so we'll see how much power we get in using 12 volt panels. Let me show you how they're connected up. Now I usually have these panels connected together in series, but just for this test today, I've taken two of these panels, have parallel adapters, and then those are going inside to the power station. Now the second solar test I'll be running on the power station is hooking together these three 325 watt solar panels. These are 36 volt, they're connected in series, so we're hoping to get somewhere near 800 to 900 watts. Now these are angled up a ton right now, just leaning on my fence. I do have plans to mount them on my shed in a little bit. Okay guys, we're back inside. Let me show you the quick setting, how to make sure this is set to solar mode. So you click the settings button and you look at your DC input source here and it's already set to PV. Now this should be able to recognize between 12 volt solar panels or higher solar panels. So let's plug in the 12 volt panels and see what happens. Okay, so I plugged in the 12 volt solar panels and we're getting 175 watts charging input. Now what's really cool is this charge controller seems to be able to differentiate between low voltage and high voltage solar panels automatically. For example, my Blue Yeti AC200P could not use 12 volt solar panels automatically. I had to change it over to car charging to do that. And even then it kind of wasn't ideal. So this will actually work with 12 volt solar panels or higher. So let's go ahead and plug in our higher voltage array and see what happens. Okay, so I hooked in the larger voltage solar array and we're getting almost 800 watts charging. You can see 797 watts. That means this can charge in about 2.5 hours just off solar input. Now the last way to charge up this power station out of the box is using this 12 volt cigarette charging cable. Now remember, you do have to go into the settings on the screen and set it to other charging mode to use this charging cable. Okay, so this 12 volt socket cable is perfect for charging off another battery, off your vehicle or your boat, or even another power station. Just remember, if you are going to charge off your vehicle, just make sure your engine is running so that your alternator is charging up your starter battery so you never leave yourself stranded. Let's see how much power we're getting in on the power station. Okay, so we're getting 99 watts charging input using the 12 volt socket cable. Now this is designed so that you can plug it into your vehicle and not blow a fuse. So this is actually designed to charge slow on purpose. Now this is a great way to keep this charged up on a road trip, or if you're heading out to your camping destination, you can keep the power station charged up while using your vehicle starter system. Now if you remember, this power station has a 100 watt USB-C port, and just to make sure it wasn't bidirectional, I plugged in my Caval USB-C charger. And looking closer at the screen, you can see we're not getting any input wattage. So this USB port only supports 100 watts output. Now I just wanted to demonstrate that this does support pass-through charging once again. So I have a large load going out of the AC inverter, and then I have solar plugged into the solar input over here. Let's take a closer look at the screen. So we're draining the battery at 1516 watts through the AC inverter, and we're charging it up with solar panels at 728 watts. Well, hopefully that was enough information to illustrate how capable this power station is, especially at charging. Now you do have the ability to dual charge this with the AC adapter and solar at the same time for a max of 1100 watts. So this does have the ability to charge up pretty quick, and I'm very happy with how fast it charges. Okay, so now that we've finished testing the power station completely, now it's time to move forward with the power station grading system to give this a score of 1 to 10 based on its price, its performance, features, and any issues that I find with it. So that way you can tell the difference between all the competition and decide if this one is right for you. So let's go ahead and jump into the first point. Number 1, does this power station charge up to 100% in less than 4 hours? Yes, with dual charging input, you can actually get 1100 watts and charge it in about 2 hours. Number 2, does this power station accept pass-through charging, meaning you can use it and charge it at the same time? Yes, it supports pass-through charging. Number 3, does this have a pure sine wave output on the AC inverter? With all my testing, I did confirm it puts out 120 volts and does have a pure sine wave output. Number 4, does this have a regulated DC output, meaning that the regulation of the voltage stays the same during the whole state of charge of the power station? Yes, this is regulated at 13.5 volts. Number 5, does this have an informational display? Yes, this shows you everything you want to know about it, like being the watts in, the watts out, the percentage, and you can see basically everything in all the settings on the screen, which is pretty nice. Number 6, does this have any auto shut off settings, meaning it'll shut off the AC inverter or DC output after a given amount of time? No, by default, it does not have any eco mode settings. You can go into the screen and set up eco mode on the AC inverter if you want, but I always advise just leaving that off in case you want to run something for a long period of time. Number 7, let's talk about the USB output on this power station. First, does it support USB-C? Yes, it does. Next, does it support at least 100 watts output? Yes, it does. And the third aspect, does it support bidirectional charging, meaning you can charge this power station with USB-C or output power to a device? No, it doesn't. So out of those three options, it gets 0.66 points out of 1 point available. Number 8, does this meet at least 85% of its rated capacity, either through the discharge of the DC output or the AC inverter? Now, unfortunately, we were not able to hit 85% on either of those options, so we cannot give it a point for its rated capacity. Number 9, does this power station charge up in under 5 hours using solar input? Now, because this supports 900 watts of charging input via solar panels, it can charge up in around 2.5 hours, which is pretty awesome. And number 10, one of the most important things is the price per watt hour. Does this come in at 80 cents per watt hour or less? Now, at its discount price, it's pretty close. It comes in at 83 cents per watt hour, and at its MSRP, it comes in at $1.02 per watt hour. So unfortunately, it doesn't meet that 80 cents per watt hour, so we can't give it a score. And if we total up everything through this power station grading system, it comes at 7.66 points out of 10 points available. Now, this grading system is a way to give feedback to Energizer so they can improve their product to make it better for my viewers. Hopefully you guys found this helpful. Okay, so now that we got the grading portion of this power station out of the way, I want to talk about some of the pros and cons so all of you can make a decision if this one is right for you, your use case or not. So let's start with the pros. So the first thing that comes to mind is this 30 amp DC output. Most power stations, large power stations like this, don't offer a large DC output. So you can actually use this as like a house battery in your RV, teardrop camper, car camping, or if you're overlanding, because you can pull 30 amps out of that. You can power your lights, fridges, 12 volt water pumps, things like that, all off this power station. So very good benefit there. Now the next pro was the 900 watts of solar. Now this is an upgraded version over what I'd consider my other power stations like the Blue Yeti AC200P. For that one, you have to actually accept low or high voltage solar panels, and it's kind of annoying. This one is awesome because it'll tell the difference between low voltage and high voltage solar panels. So 12 volts all the way up to 145 volts. So this one will basically auto select your solar panels. You just plug and play, which is really nice if you have different solar panels that you're going to be using with the power station. This one will basically accept any solar input, which is awesome. The next thing is all the adapters are included with the power station. Now, some power stations don't come with the extra adapters, but this one came with the DC output, all the charging adapters. Very good pro that you don't have to purchase anything extra to use the full functionality of this power station. And the last benefit that kind of sticks out versus some other power stations, this has lithium iron phosphate inside of it, and that allows you to have 2,000 life cycles down to 80% capacity. So after 2,000 life cycles, you've used the top 20% of the battery capacity and you'll still have 80% remaining. You'll have a very long life out of this power station. So let's go ahead and talk about some of the cons for this power station. Being that it is lithium iron phosphate, it does weigh 66 pounds, so it is pretty heavy. So not everyone's gonna be able to move this one around. It does have the nice handles built into it, but just be aware it's pretty heavy. Now the next con on this is basically the price per watt hour. It does come in above 80 cents a watt hour, so you have to think about, is the extra cost worth the extra features, or can you go with something that's less expensive? Now the next con that comes to mind is the 85% capacity. We were not able to get 85% out of the DC output discharge test or the AC inverter discharge test. So I'm not sure if this is this particular power station. I'm only allowed to test the one that I've received. So I just want you guys to be aware that there is a chance that you may not get a full 85% capacity out of it when you're discharging it. So just be aware. It could just be this one, or it could be all of them. I'm not sure. And the last con that I think about here is the actual 30 amp cable that came out. The Anderson power pole was backwards, so you can easily slide those apart and swap them around like I showed earlier in the video. But I just want you guys to be aware you will have to swap those cables for the standard of Anderson power pole. Now this power station does come with a year warranty, so you can rest assured if you have any issues, you can have it fixed or replaced or whatever within that first year of purchasing it. Okay, so we're coming to the end of the video here. That's the review on the Energizer PPS2000W. Now let me know what you guys thought about the power station in the comments below. I'd love you guys to give Energizer some feedback. What do you guys think about the price, the capacity, the features, the solar charging? Anyway, throw a comment down below and let Energizer know what your thoughts are. Now overall, I think this is an absolute beast. There's just a few things that can be improved on to make it better, and hopefully Energizer has heard my feedback and they'll make those changes. Now overall, I do these videos, even though they're super long, I do these videos so you guys can know if this is something that you want to purchase with your hard-earned cash, because I know you guys work hard to save up for things like this, so I want you to know if this is going to be right for you. Anyway guys, thank you so much for watching this video. Hopefully you guys are subscribed to the channel and stick around for future videos because I have a lot more coming out. Thanks for watching. We'll see you guys in the next video.